You may have noticed in our last episode that three of the four philosophers we discussed came from countries deeply affected by Protestantism: Germany, home of Kant and Hegel, and Scotland, home of David Hume. That's not a coincidence. The theological consequences of those philosophical systems were felt first and most severely in Protestant biblical scholarship. Protestantism, generally speaking, takes the historical character of the Bible seriously, even if Protestant communities are missing several books of Scripture and lack the Church's authoritative interpretation. In the aftermath of the Enlightenment, however, with relativism and subjectivism running rampant through the academies of Europe, Protestant scholars were essentially given free rein to apply the ideas of Kant and company to the study of the Bible. What followed is called the historical critical method. This is the name for an approach to Scripture that became dominant in the 19th century and remains enormously influential today, including, sadly, in many Catholic institutions. Here's how it works. The historical critical method starts from a position of radical skepticism toward any historical claim in the Bible. It treats ancient texts the way a modern scientist would treat an untested hypothesis. You don't accept the claim unless it can be verified by external archaeological or documentary evidence from another source. And even then, you interpret everything through the lens of a very specific assumption that history necessarily progresses over time, that modern man is more objective and rational than ancient man, and therefore ancient writers were simply recording their limited, culturally conditioned experience. So, what happens when you apply this method to Genesis? Well, the first chapters become simply a creation myth, something common to Middle Eastern cultures of the time, reflecting the limited cosmological knowledge of ancient writers. Moses crossing the Red Sea, maybe he led a few hundred people across a shallow portion of a river during low tide. Demonic possession? That's just what primitive people called what we now recognize as mental illness. These are not fringe conclusions from the historical critical method. These are mainstream positions that became the norm in European academia by the mid 19th century. And they were entrenched in an intellectual atmosphere that also included Marx and Darwin, two more thinkers who viewed the world as a matter of struggle, survival, and evolutionary progress, with no room for the supposed fairy tale of biblical history. Now, to be fair, and this is important, the method itself is not necessarily and always catastrophically wrong. Historical context genuinely helps us understand ancient literature. Scholars like Scott Hahn and John Bergsma have used certain tools from this method in service of sound Catholic biblical study. The problem is what the method presupposes and the conclusions it demands when those presuppositions are accepted uncritically. One revealing example: